This video is proudly recorded and produced on OpenBSD. Today I was experimenting with OpenBSD and I wanted to get my HDMI audio to work so I don't need to plug and unplug my wired headphone when I'm actually switching between devices. For that one I did a bit of research on the internet, and one of the suggestions was in the mailing list to modify a bit of the kernel code, namely to just remove a couple of lines and then try to rebuild the custom kernel, and that should work. I did it. It sort of didn't work, unfortunately, even though that the device, everything is detected, but nonetheless sort of the device is disabled still. But during the process I learned how to compile the OpenBSD kernel code, and that was a very fun experience. So I decided to create a video for it, just to share it with you in case that you wanted to do it something like that in the future. Let's begin. So the first thing is to switch to the root user. Afterwards we are going to go to the src directory and we have to grab the kernel code from the FTP. So FTP https cdn openbsd.org pub openbsd. We need to pass the release name, so this one sys.tar.gz. The next step is to extract the file, so we can extract it like this. And don't be afraid by the number of files. OpenBSD kernel is relatively small, and surprisingly on my machine it took only 10 minutes, and I used -J4 flag, so my machine is actually 5 years old. If you look at it, you see it's the Core i5 8th gen, so exactly 5 years old, and it compiled very fast. On this machine also I tried to compile Wine. It took between 30 minutes to 1 hour. I did it a couple of times and it varied, depends on the machine workload, but compiling the kernel was super fast and I was surprised, to be honest. Long time ago I compiled a Linux kernel and that one took easily like 30 minutes to 1 hour on my machine. Let's continue. Now we have to actually switch to the /sys arc and then basically choose the architecture that we want. In our case would be AMD 64. Then go to the config directory. You may actually think that okay, we were actually under the src, how come actually we suddenly jumped to the sys? So basically /sys is a symlink to /user /src/sys. so if we go to / here and we do shlrt, you see that sys is actually symlinked to the user src sys. So let's continue. Now we can actually go and compile the kernel. Of course it would be useless in our case because we are not going to modify anything in the kernel code, but also we can change the kernel name. So here the default is generic MP, generic multiprocessor. We can change that one to something else. So let's say change it from generic MP to something like custom.mp. So we copied that configuration file and now we need to actually run config custom mp. The next step is go to the directory of the custom mp. So it generated a directory here, and here we see a make file that we can execute it. We can also do make clean in case that you have done it before, but since this one is entirely fresh, so we can just do make -J4, so it uses the multiple CPU cores to compile the kernel, so it will be faster. So I'm going to pause the video because this is a relatively CPU intensive process, and I'll come back once it's finished. Alright, so now the kernel is compiled. The next step is to install the kernel. For that one, we just need to run make install and wait a couple of seconds. And now we are done. Now what we have to do, we have to actually reboot the computer, so the changes will be taken effect and a new kernel will replace the existing kernel. And the new kernel name, if we do unname /a, instead of generic mp would be custom.mp. So now I'm going to reboot the computer and I will see you guys after the reboot. Now this is the post reboot, and if we do unname a, you can see that we have custom kernel loaded in the OpenBSD. One thing to note before ending this video is that OpenBSD doesn't really recommend to compile and run the custom kernel, because also if you do that, when you do the syspatch, I'm assuming the changes will be overwritten because that actually creates a new kernel or something. So it's not really recommended unless you really know what you are doing or you have some actually issues with your current kernel. For example, in my case, I wanted to enable the HDMI audio and it didn't work out. If it was working out, I was willing to maintain the custom kernel by myself, but unfortunately it didn't work out. That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to take a moment to thank Patreon contributors: Grog with $30 generous, Stellar Orbit with $20 generous, OpenBSD Maximalist, Alexander M, Hogarth Hackscock, Monty, Russell Willis, OpenBSD Enthusiast, DM'd, John Collins, Liquid Mobius, and OpenBSD Curious, Sikter.